Hello, friends. I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about the HOA that wants me to vacate my gazebo. I was halfway through a glass of lemonade in my gazebo when a woman I didn't know stuck her head through my gate, pointed at me like she was sighting a comet, and announced that she represented the neighborhood association and would be documenting my non-compliance. I almost choked. The gazebo was on my own slab, in my own backyard, behind a privacy fence I paid for, on a property that, this is the kicker, was not, is not, and will never be part of any association. The subdivision next door has an HOA. My house predates it. But there she was in an embroidered polo, phone on record, informing me that gazebos were restricted structures, and that if I didn't vacate immediately, she'd call 911. I blinked. You're going to call 911 to report me sitting in a chair on my property? Yes, she said, tapping her phone like she'd just ordered a salad. We have rules. You're violating them. My name is Max, I said. What's yours? She drew herself up in a way that let me know she'd practiced this in a mirror. I'm Tressa, board liaison. Liaison to what? To compliance, she said, very pleased with herself. I looked down at the wood grain table I'd sanded myself, the citronella candle I'd lit to keep the mosquitoes from eating me alive, the little wind chime I'd bought at a flea market, and then back at a person who thought compliance was a place and she'd been promoted to represent it. I said calmly, because this is how I am until I've had enough. Tressa, this lot is outside the association. Your covenants don't apply here. You can't tell me to leave my own gazebo. She squinted. We annexed you by unanimous board vote last month. I have the minutes. My laugh startled even me. You can vote to annex the moon. That doesn't make it yours. She tilted her phone toward me. Final warning, leave the gazebo. Final warning, I said back. Please exit my property. Her expression curdled. She lifted her phone as if it were a baton and jabbed toward the side gate. If you leave that structure, I'm calling. Okay, I said, because I was hot and done. I stood, set my lemonade down, and walked off the gazebo. For fun, and because the pool was a few steps away, I dropped my t-shirt on a chair and dove in. The water closed over my head with that muffled quiet that lasts a second too short to fix people like Tressa. I surfaced to a siren chirp, the kind police use when they're not rushing, but still want the world to part. She had, in fact, called 911. By the time the officers got to my gate, Tressa had arranged herself at the edge of my pool like she owned the deck, narrating into her phone about how I had fled the restricted structure, likely to conceal non-compliance. I treaded water, pushed hair out of my face, and waved hi to the officers. They did that look. If you work with the public, you know it. The one where they catalog the scene in under 2 seconds and decide who's a problem. Afternoon, the taller officer said, keeping his tone neutral. We got a call about trespassing. Yep, I said. Guy trespassing is me, the owner. I swam to the shallow end, climbed out, and grabbed the towel from the bench. ID? He nodded. I handed him my driver license. You want the deed too? Got it on an app because of a different situation with a delivery driver who thought my driveway was a turn lane. The other officer, stocky and kind-eyed, gave Tressa a measured look. Ma'am, can we also see your ID? She blinked rapidly. I'm the board liaison. I understand, he said, and I still need to verify who you are. I shouldn't have to prove anything. He's non-compliant. I wrapped the towel around my shoulders and tried not to laugh again. The tall officer peered at my license, glanced back at the house, and asked, This your name on the mailbox too? Yep, I said. Been here since before the coffee shop up the street was a coffee shop and not a place that sold fireworks out of a storage container in July. He took in the fence, the pool, the gazebo. And this property is not within the association? Nope, I said, shaking water off my ears. They sent me a letter last year. I dropped off a copy of my deed and a survey at their office to point out I'm outside their recorded plat. Thought that settled it. Tressa made a sharp sound in her throat. We updated our covenants. Ma'am, the kind-eyed officer said gently, updating your neighborhood rules doesn't change property boundaries. You can't annex someone's lot by vote. Then he's still in violation, she insisted, jabbing a finger at my gazebo. Our guidelines don't allow those structures. Your guidelines, I said, keeping my voice steady because one of the few things I refuse to be is the person who makes a cop's day harder. Don't apply here. The tall officer handed my license back. From what I can see, this is a civil matter between the two of you, but it also looks like the caller is on your property without permission. Correct, I said. She entered after I asked her to leave. "And you're recording me," Tressa snapped, brandishing her phone as if it were proof of something. "I record everything now," I said. "Ring cameras, the one in the eave, that one there." I pointed to the little waterproof dome I'd installed after somebody clipped my mailbox with a moving truck and pretended the road was a rumor. The officers exchanged a glance, I read, as we are really not putting in for overtime on this. The kind-eyed one turned to Tressa. "Ma'am, you need to leave this property." "I am performing an inspection," she said like it was Henry V at the breach. "Under our bylaws, the board has access to common areas and fixtures, all of which," I said, "are not on this parcel." "Ma'am," the officer repeated with a patience I'd nominate for sainthood. "If you don't exit now, we will have to consider trespassing. He's asked you to leave. We're asking you to leave. Please do so." She stared at me with an intensity that made me wonder if she thought she could set people on fire with her mind, then pivoted with stiff dignity and marched out through my gate. She kept her camera trained on us the entire way, narrating into it. "Leaving scene due to hostile environment. Documentation will be forwarded to counsel." The tall officer exhaled. "Sorry for the disruption," he said. "As far as we're concerned, you're good here. If you don't want to press trespass today, that's your choice. But we can write an incident report." "I'd like the report," I said. "And I'd also like to lodge a complaint about misuse of emergency services. Not sure if that's something you handle." "We'll note the nature of the call," he said. "It goes into the record. Do you want a case number?" "Please," I said. They gave me the number, shook my hand, and departed. I watched Tressa across the fence line as she accosted a jogger, telling him something dramatic based on the way his eyebrows shot up. He made the universal sign for "I don't know you, good luck," and kept jogging. She vanished into the HOA America of cul-de-sacs and mail kiosks. I went back to the gazebo, reclaimed my lemonade, and realized I was shaking. People think the mic drop moments are where you get your satisfaction, but it's after, usually when the adrenaline leaves and you have to decide whether you're going to live at the mercy of whoever thinks they can boss you around or make sure they can't. I'm not a combative person by nature, I'm a fixer. I get a problem, I bring receipts. My dad taught high school civics for 30 years and believed that the backbone of a country was boring paperwork you keep in a shoebox. On the very day I closed on my house, he made me a shoebox. It was actually a fireproof home safe, and loaded it with copies of deeds, permits, the survey, all of it. I dried off, opened my safe, and set copies of my deed, plot, survey, and the exception map, showing my parcel as separate from the HOA's recorded plat. Then I opened my laptop and exported the video clips from my cameras. I created a neat bundle. 2025-0614_HOA_incident. I don't name files cutesy things. I want a calendar to look at them and know they make sense. I didn't want to spend my Saturday building a paper trail, but I also didn't want to let someone like Tressa normalize the idea that phoning 911 is a tool for enforcing her personal preferences. In my state, knowingly making a false report is a misdemeanor, and repeated misuse can escalate. Trespass is also against the law. You don't get to test your jurisdiction by invading someone else's. That evening, my neighbor across the back fence, his name is Ezra, a gentle giant who spends his weekends rebuilding old radios, called me. "Max," he said. "You okay?" I saw the blue lights. "Fine," I said. New character in the neighborhood, introduced herself as an HOA liaison, called 911 because I was sitting in my gazebo. "You're not in the HOA." "I know," I said. "She knows but doesn't like it." "Oh," he said, and I could hear him adjust the phone like he does when he's about to tell me a story he thinks I should hear. "She's the one who sent me a letter about my antenna last week." I told her the FCC has rules about that, and she wrote back that her rules outrank federal law, which I thought was a pretty ambitious opinion. "Did you keep the letters?" "Of course," he said. "You want copies?" "Yes, please." Over the next week, a trickle of stories became a stream. People in the association were afraid to push back because if you live in one, the board can make your life complicated even if they can't do it legally. They can write you up. They can post notices. They can call your lender. Most lenders won't care if your payments are current, but it still rattles you to get a letter on letterhead with words you have to look up. Not all associations are like that, but this one, with Tressa in a polo, was on an ambition kick. 2 days after the pool incident, I received an envelope with a photocopy of their annexation addendum and a letter that read like it had been written while someone stood pacing in a kitchen, whisper yelling at a computer. It said in summary, Your lot is now subject to our architectural guidelines. Your gazebo is non-compliant. Your pool is non-compliant. Your fence is non-compliant. And your refusal to grant access for inspection is a violation that can result in fines, liens, and escalation to legal counsel. I stapled the letter to my survey and wrote in thick black marker, "Not my plat." Then I composed a response. I kept it short because I've learned the more you write to people like this, the more words they have to rearrange into trouble, and I wrote, "Dear Board, thank you for your letter dated June 16th. As you know from my previous correspondence to your office, attached again, my property, parcel ID, number, is not within your recorded plat and is not subject to your covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I do not consent to any inspections or enforcement attempts by your association. Any further attempts to enter my property or to represent to third parties, including but not limited to law enforcement and my mortgage servicer, that you have jurisdiction over my lot will be treated as harassment and referred to counsel. Sincerely, Max." I printed 2 copies, walked one over to their Dropbox, and sent the other by certified mail. It is amazing how fast you can move up a person's priority list when you verify receipt. Here's where the side plots began to weave in. The HOA's irrigation system, installed by a contractor 2 years ago with more enthusiasm than wisdom, had been spraying over their back wall into the drainage swale that runs behind our block. The swale is not theirs, and I know this because I keep, in my safe, the city's drainage easement map, which shows exactly where stormwater is permitted to go. If you point expensive sprinklers at a place water isn't supposed to go, you're not just wasting money. You're eroding a system designed to keep streets from flooding. Ezra, who knows everyone at city maintenance because he once rescued a sanitation truck driver whose rig got stuck under a low-hanging oak, gave me the right email address. I wrote the city a polite note. "Hi there. From my property at address, I have observed overspray and ponding behind the HOA wall due to their irrigation. This is causing erosion in the drainage swale. I'm including video clips. Please advise." The city inspector, a thoughtful guy named Hector who wears a hat with the city logo and has the patience of a saint at a long barbecue, came out, looked, measured, and left a notice on the association's bulletin board by the mail kiosk. It essentially said, "Fix your irrigation or face fines." How did I know? Because Tressa filmed herself tearing it off the board, fuming, and posted it to a private group chat that she forgot included a person who isn't on her side anymore. That person, who I will call June because that's not her name but it fits, slipped screenshots beneath my fence in a manila envelope with a post-it. "For your records. Also, for the love of everything, please make her stop." I had never met June. I later would, and if this were a movie, she'd walk in with a whistle sound effect, the kind where the camera pans up and the music tells you the cavalry has, at last, arrived in sensible shoes. But that came later. First came the letter from a law firm with a name that sounded like someone poured Scrabble tiles down a hallway and charged $400 an hour to pick them up. The firm's letter informed me that I was in continuing violation and that if I did not remove my illegal structures, the association would begin fines at $250 a day and pursue lien placement up to and including foreclosure remedies. It also included, for good measure, a transcript of Tressa's narration. Me fleeing my gazebo, me hiding in my pool. There was no mention that the officers asked her to leave. There was, however, a highlighted quote, "You are in violation and your refusal to comply is problematic under our scheme." I set the letter down and took a breath. I don't mind a fight when it's necessary. I do, however, prefer to have a better sword. This is where I called a real attorney, mine. People think lawyers are only for when you're being sued, but honestly, the best thing I ever did was call mine the first time a neighbor tried to get me to pay to cut down a tree that wasn't on my side. I said, "Hi, remember me? Non-HOA guy next to the HOA? They're trying an annexation stunt. They called law enforcement on me for sitting in my gazebo. They just sent a law firm letter threatening fines and a lien," he said in the dry voice of a man who has seen worse and expects better. "Please bring me copies of your deed, your title insurance, the HOA's recorded plat, and any correspondence you've had with them. Also a copy of your mortgage note if you still have one." I did. He examined my stack like a librarian sorting returns and then gave a satisfied nod. "You're not subject to their covenants," he said. "They can't just decide you are. If they file a false lien or threaten foreclosure without basis, that's slander of title. You can sue them for clouding your property's title. You can also pursue a civil harassment order against specific individuals if they continue to trespass or harass you. If you want, I can write a letter that will hurt their feelings. Please do, I said. He did not disappoint. His letter, which he allowed me to read in his office like it was candy in a display case, included phrases like, "Your client's lack of jurisdiction is not a matter of opinion," and "Any recordation of a lien against our client's property will result in immediate action for slander of title, including damages and attorney fees." He also attached the police incident report number and warned them about misuse of emergency services. But legal, just the one thread. Another thread, which I did not plan but fell into my lap because life likes a side quest, came in the form of a golden retriever puppy that wandered into my yard through the back gate 2 mornings later. The tag read Pumpkin. Pumpkin was damp and smelled like she had made her own irrigation inspection. I called the number and got a voicemail promising a call back. I washed Pumpkin off, gave her water, and waited. 20 minutes later, a teenager with braces and an expression like the world had just opened a window arrived at my gate with a leash and a thank you that made my day. "She slipped out when my little brother left the slider open," he said. "I'm sorry if she got into your yard without permission." "She was a delight," I said. "You live in the association?" He nodded. "My mom's on the board, June." I almost didn't connect it. "June, who left me an envelope?" His eyes widened. "You got it?" She felt weird about that. She doesn't know what else to do. Tressa keeps banging on our door about the antenna and about your lot and about how she's going to clean up the neighborhood. "Tell your mom thank you," I said. "And tell her that if she ever needs a witness for anything, my cameras are her cameras." He relaxed. "Thanks. Also, if you ever need a hand with, tech stuff, I build computers. I'm saving up for a better graphics card." "Noted," I said. "What's your name?" "Oren." "Oren," I repeated. "Pumpkin is welcome here any time, but maybe with a leash." He grinned and left, Pumpkin prancing like she'd just negotiated favorable treaty terms. Monday morning, the city inspector returned to the HOA to follow up on the irrigation notice. He was met by Tressa with a phone out and a monologue about harassment. He insisted on measuring again. There is a particular joy in watching a professional do his job while someone determined to be messy tries to derail him. Hector measured, wrote another notice, and told them fines would begin in a week. They refused to sign. He documented the refusal. The next day, a different board member, we'll call him Brandon because that is actually his name and he deserves to be remembered, showed up at the city office with an attitude and a long argument about property rights ending with, "We pay our assessments. This is government overreach." The clerk called Hector, who stood firm and pointed at the photos. Brandon left in a huff. 2 days later, the HOA hired a contractor who knew what they were doing and fixed the overspray. A small win. Guess who took credit? Tressa in a newsletter calling it a collaborative effort led by Board Liaison for Compliance. In the middle of all that, the law firm representing the association sent a second letter to my attorney that was almost polite. It acknowledged receipt of our documentation, conceded that my lot appears to be outside their plat, the kind of sentence a person writes while frowning at a map, and proposed a good neighbor agreement by which I would voluntarily adhere to certain visible aesthetic guidelines so as not to dilute the community's visual harmony. It assured me that of course they would not proceed with liens as long as I cooperated. My lawyer looked over the top of the paper at me. "Want to voluntarily adhere to anything?" "I want to voluntarily keep my umbrella the color I like," I said. "Also, I want them to stop calling 911 on me for sitting in my chair." "We'll politely decline," he said. We did in a short note that said, "Our client will not be entering into any agreement with your client." It also reminded them that the first letter had threatened foreclosure, and we would be keeping that in our file labeled, "Counts against your good faith." The next Saturday dawned bright and pleasant, with a sky the color of a new shirt and the kind of breeze that lifts the flag in front of the school down the block. I was in the yard planting herbs in a little raised bed when a man I didn't recognize leaned over my fence and said, "Hey, is Tressa bothering you?" "Hi," I said, brushing dirt off my hands. "Who's asking?" "Name's Whit," he said. "I live 2 streets over. She's been on a tear. She posted a picture of your gazebo in the neighborhood app and said you were illegally occupying common space." Folks were confused. I said I didn't think your lot was part of the club. She told me to mind my compliance. "Thanks for letting me know," I said. "I've got a file." He grimaced. She also told my wife our pumpkin display last fall was non-compliant because we had more than 3 gourds. My wife looked up the rules and it turns out the number is a recommendation, not a rule. And she told Tressa that. Tressa said the board reserves the right to elevate recommendations to rules on a case-by-case basis. He shook his head. I've lived under 3 associations. This one is new to being bad. I wished him luck and went back to basil and rosemary and the feeling that somewhere a storm was building out of clear sky. Then came the day that pushed this from annoying to serious. I was at my kitchen table paying bills when my phone buzzed with a notification from my mortgage servicer. We have received a notice of potential covenant violation from an association. My stomach did that roller coaster lurch. I opened the notice. It was a form letter. We have been informed that your lot is in violation of association guidelines. Please remedy to avoid potential action. I called the number. After 10 minutes of menus, I got a person and explained that the association had no jurisdiction over my lot. She said, "Oh, let me make a note. We get a handful of these a month. Usually it's a misunderstanding." She put me on hold, came back and said, "We'll disregard. Can you send me a letter on your letterhead saying so?" "Yes," she said, "I'll email it now." She did. I filed it. Then I called my attorney. He sighed in that way again. The way that tells you someone else's stubbornness just gifted him billable hours he didn't need. "We're going to send them a cease and desist regarding third-party representations," he said. "They can't tell your lender you're in violation when they know you aren't. That could be interference with your loan. When there are numbers attached, judges pay more attention." The cease and desist went out that afternoon. It was perfectly calm and built like a brick. It spelled out everything. They had threatened liens. They had contacted my lender. They had sent their agent onto my property. They had misused emergency services. It said that any further interference would result in immediate filing for injunctive relief and damages. This is when June asked to meet. She texted me from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is June. Thank you for returning pumpkin. Could we talk? Coffee? I have information you may find relevant." We met on my patio because the gazebo felt like a dare, and I was not trying to start a second season before the first was done. She arrived in sneakers and a cardigan, carrying a bulging folder and a face that told me she hadn't slept well. She set the folder down and said, "I'm embarrassed to be the person who shows up with papers, but we've been trying to handle this internally for months, and it's not getting better. You're not in the club, you don't have to care, but you were dragged into it, and I think you should see what's going on, because it affects why she's acting like this." The folder contained board minutes, emails, and printouts from their community app. She pointed to an agenda item labeled Annexation Discussion. Under it, a line. "Board unanimous that we should pursue annexation of adjacent parcels for the sake of aesthetic continuity. Council advises that owners must consent. Board to brainstorm approach to encourage cooperation." In the margin, someone had written in a different pen, "We can just enforce and they'll fall in line." "This is Tressa," June said quietly. "She's persuasive in small rooms. She tells people what they want to hear. Some of us have pushed back, but she frames it as disloyalty." "Why are you on the board?" I asked. It wasn't accusatory, it was curious. "People don't volunteer to manage their neighbors' moods for fun." "Because I thought it mattered," she said. "We had some storm damage last year and the old board was slow, and I thought someone ought to make sure the reserve funds were spent right. I'm a bookkeeper. I like things with columns." She then told me about how Tressa got herself appointed as liaison for compliance, a role that didn't exist before she created it, and how she convinced the board to hire the law firm that sent me the scary letter. She showed me a budget line that made me whistle compliance initiatives $18,000. To be clear, for a neighborhood our size, that was a lot. "And this," June said, pulling a sheet from the bottom like a magician drawing the last scarf, "is the note from the bank. We were fined last quarter by the city for irrigation. It was small, but the letter warned that repeated violations could affect our insurance. We didn't get a second fine because you called the city. That saved us money. But Tressa told the board she negotiated a waiver. So she took credit," I said. "She takes a lot of credit," June said. "But here's why I really needed to talk to you." She pointed to a series of emails where Tressa instructed the law firm to send letters to 3 adjacent properties. Mine, Ezra's, and a third lot that's actually vacant and owned by an investor in another state, asserting annexation and threatening enforcement. The firm asked 2 questions. "Do you have recorded consent?" and Have you amended the covenants to include these parcels? Tressa replied, consent is implied by adjacency. The board voted unanimously. Proceed. June rubbed her temple. We did not vote to proceed. We discussed it, and counsel told us we could not without consent. She told the attorney otherwise. June, I said, that's bad. I know, she said. We're meeting next week to remove her as liaison, but she has proxies. She'll try to pack the meeting. What I'm asking is, if we do the right thing and tell her no, will you be willing to speak up about the 911 call? Some people think she exaggerates, but not everyone understands how far she's gone. I'll do more than speak, I said. I'll bring the report. The meeting day arrived with one of those summer storms that appear like a curtain pulled across the sky, then roll away as if they had somewhere better to be. The association's clubhouse, this is a converted model home, not a grand hall, was packed. People sat in folding chairs. Kids played with juice boxes. I stood in the back with Ezra, who had brought a folder that probably contained enough exhibits to launch an audit. Tressa opened the meeting like a ringmaster, smiling wide, welcoming us to a positive conversation about community standards. The agenda slid briskly to board matters, and June, to her credit, didn't blink. She stood and moved to remove the compliance liaison role entirely. It's not in our bylaws, she said. It's been a source of conflict and confusion. I make the motion to dissolve it. Tressa's smile flickered. Objection, she said. This role is essential to maintaining the beauty of our neighborhood. Second, said Brandon, crossing his arms like he had just entered a staring contest with a cactus. The room murmured. June held up the bylaws. There is a process for amending the bylaws to add positions. We didn't do that. We simply started acting like the position existed. That's backward. We also have exposed ourselves to legal risk by sending letters beyond our authority. Speaking of letters, I said loud enough to be heard, my name is Max. I live next door. I'm not in this association. 2 weeks ago, I was sitting in my own gazebo when your liaison entered my yard, demanded I leave, and called 911 when I walked to my pool. The police came. They asked her to leave. I have the report number. Your association's law firm then sent me a letter threatening fines and foreclosure. They also contacted my mortgage servicer. All of that occurred after counsel told you that you could not annex my parcel without consent. The room went very quiet. Tressa laughed. It was an odd laugh, brittle. He's making it sound dramatic. We were pursuing a good faith compliance conversation. You called 911, a woman near the front said, incredulous. On a neighbor? For a gazebo? I thought it was a safety issue, Tressa said. It was safety, a guy in a baseball cap muttered, once you showed up. June kept her voice level. This is not about hating anyone. It's about staying within our authority. We cannot enforce rules outside our jurisdiction. We also cannot misrepresent to law enforcement or to lenders that someone is in violation of rules that don't apply to them. Brandon, perhaps sensing the wind shifting, tried another angle. Look, we're all just trying to keep things nice. My sister lives in a community where the board doesn't enforce anything, and there are 9 colors of garbage cans. You can't even tell where the mailboxes are. Garbage cans are not 911, someone said. The motion is on the table, June said. All in favor of dissolving the liaison role and returning compliance to the full board's oversight with proper process, raise your hands. Hands rose. I counted more than half. Tressa stared like she could keep hands down by willpower alone. Against? Fewer hands. The motion carried. Tressa stood very still, then said, voice clipped, "You people don't understand what's at stake. We are a brand. If we let standards slip, we lose value." June nodded. "And if we invite lawsuits, we lose more." She turned to me. "Max, would you like to file your complaint formally? We can hear it now." I stepped forward, laid the police incident number and the mortgage servicer's letter on the table, and said, "I don't need your board to vote on my rights, and I don't need your approval. What I need is for the association to stop. Stop entering my property. Stop communicating with my lender. Stop sending me letters. Stop calling emergency services because you don't like what my yard looks like. If you continue, I will file suit for slander of title, harassment, and any other counsel recommends. I hope that's clear." It was clear. It was also the first time I saw Tressa look unsure. She recovered quickly, though, and tried one last play. "Let the record show that he has a gazebo that violates our look." "I have a gazebo that violates your sense of ownership over things you don't own," I said. The board voted to instruct their law firm to retract all prior letters to non-member properties and to send a notice to the mortgage servicer correcting the record. They also voted to implement a policy that no board member or agent is to enter a private yard without written consent or an emergency. The crowd applauded. Someone whistled. After the meeting, as people gathered their kids and empty cups, Tressa approached me. Up close, she was smaller, younger than I'd thought, with eyes that darted like she was trained to scan rooms for non-compliance long before she got a polo shirt. "You humiliated me," she said, not quite whispering, not quite accusing, but somewhere in the middle, like she couldn't decide whether she wanted a fight or my mercy. "I told the truth," I said. "If you had told the truth about your authority 2 weeks ago, none of this happens. You made me look like a bully." I held her gaze. "You were a bully." Then, because I am not pure, I added, "You still are. But you can stop." She opened and closed her mouth. Then she did something I didn't expect. She turned and walked away. Not in a storm, not in a huff, just away. I wish that were the end. It wasn't. People anchored to control seldom let go without trying to find a new anchor. What happened after that meeting didn't feel like a sequel, more like someone finally switched on a light. The first thump was the property line crepe myrtle. A contractor, with Tressa supervising, started cutting deep on my side. I told him boundary trees are co-owned under state law and he was trespassing. He stopped. I filmed. The city forestry office left a hanger reminding everyone fines per caliper inch are real. Shoeboxed. Next thump, paint. A windy day turned their Beautify project into gray kisses bleeding through my cedar-stained fence. "It's our fence," Tressa insisted. "Your side is yours," I said, and the wind ignored it. Their law firm suggested painting more until the gaps seal. My attorney replied, "Capillary action isn't a negotiation." I gathered estimates. Then came the easement email. They wanted to use my gate because their slope was muddy. I declined without a right of entry and insurance. Gate clicked, cameras rolled. A landscaper politely accepted a bottle of water and the situation. Meanwhile, June and her son Oren built a spreadsheet. Every compliance action, cost, and outcome. It showed 3 911 calls, all by the same person, plus city complaints that actually fined the HOA. Their attorney greenlit a disciplinary hearing. Afterward, members noticed a special meeting to consider censure. On the municipal side, the assistant city attorney reviewed my video and the report. Since 911 had been used for leverage in a civil dispute, she issued a misuse citation with a fine and mandatory class at the 911 center. Eligible for diversion. Good enough for me. The paint deadline came and went. I filed in small claims for restoration costs. In court, Tressa argued community fence and visual unifier. The judge said evenly, "You can't damage the other side and demand they adopt your fix. Judgment for me plus costs." A plain envelope arrived on day 29. My pro sanded, washed, and restained until my side looked untouched. I forwarded the paid invoice to June's ledger of things cheaper if done nicely. At the special meeting, members voted, hand count, to censure Tressa, remove her from any appointed role, restrict her from representing the association for a year, and require documentation for any board-initiated contact with law enforcement. They also launched a Neighbor 101 workshop with the city's mediation program. Insurance got involved after an annexation letter hit an out-of-state investor. The carrier demanded remedial training to renew directors' and officers' coverage. Tone changed. The day after the 911 class, Tressa came to my gate without a polo or clipboard and apologized. I accepted. Loose ends tucked. Judgment satisfied, tree healing, new paint policy requiring consent and wind checks, irrigation fixed. Oren bought his graphics card with printer fixing tips. We high-fived over a humming build. The newsletter letter landed on every fridge. 911 is for emergencies. That, plus votes, citations, checks, and spreadsheets, planted a flag. My gazebo glows at night, the pool is quiet, that is the end. Friends, thank you. See you soon.